So, John, culture obviously plays quite a big part in this course. Why do we teach culture in our language lessons? Why is it important?
Well, I think in the past we would have taught culture in terms of if somebody had been learning English, they would have also learned about the culture of England or the US and so on. Now it's more complex because people are learning English, but they may never even come into contact with people from those countries. I also think because we've used a lot of texts about different parts of the world, that you can't avoid culture in the contexts of the text that you use. So, for example, in the elementary level, you've got a text about the Mini. Well, that Mini is that classic British icon, but it actually undermines that perception of the Mini because it's obviously now it's a German car, but also the text tells you, for example, that parts of the Mini come from all over the world. So the bonnet of the Mini is made in a factory in the Netherlands, but the company is Austrian and so on. And so this idea of local cultures and global cultures is particularly important, and I think, in the classroom.
So it still makes sense to talk about culture, but not necessarily in a purely British or American context.
Yeah, I think we have to think about it as much more a global topic and dealing with diversity and local versus global cultures and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's just a natural part of the language lesson almost, isn't it?
Yes. So how can we define culture for our students?
Well, I think you can talk about culture in different ways. You can talk about, for example, the products of culture, like with the example of the Mini. But then quite a lot of the time in the life books we deal with behaviour, values and attitudes and so on. So if you take an example from the intermediate book, you've got the topic of culture and colour, where the author deals with the topic of different colours in different cultures represent different things to different people and so on. But of course, culture also then is connected so much with language. So, for example, you can look at how, for example, culture relates to emoticons in text speak, and that we use different emoticons in Western and Eastern Hemisphere countries to represent different things.
Yeah.
So the smiley that we use in Western Hemisphere countries is not the same as the smiley in Eastern Hemisphere countries and so on. So it affects all sorts of things like products, behaviour, attitudes, values and so on.
Okay, so it's very closely linked to language, in fact.
Yeah, you can't avoid it, yeah.
So the teaching of cultural awareness is quite common in the language classroom. What approach do you think we should take to teaching cultural awareness in the class?
Well, I think one approach is to choose topics that relate to as many different countries and cultures as possible. So in life, I think we've dealt with over 60 different countries from virtually every continent in order to expose students to a wider range of cultures as possible. The other thing that we're involved in doing is challenging our students, sort of any stereotypes that people have about different cultures. There's one video in lesson I like in particular, which is about the city of Oxford, and most people have sort of certain stereotype images of what Oxford is like, and we completely turn that around in the video and we show a side of Oxford that lots of people perhaps aren't familiar with, but it's a great way of getting students to rethink their views on different cultures, and in that process you're getting the students to then reflect on their own cultures, and I think that's an important approach, that you present a culture to students and then they ask those same questions about their own culture as well, and that's an important part of what we do really when we teach culture in our language lessons.